Halloween is right around the corner, and what better way to mark the occasion than to talk about the people who set pagans on fire for being stupid and bad, a practice we've tragically let fall out of favor, but thankfully the wonderful worlds of Warhammer have kept them alive and well. 40k of course has the Inquisition, but they're a bit too impersonal, you know? Their body count is in the quadrillion, sure, especially after Cryptman's little stunt, but is it really a witch hunt if you just press a button and blow up a planet? Where's the investigation, the combing through houses and taverns to find your quarry before leaving the city with a trail of crying spouses and children behind you? I mean, I'm sure that can happen with Inquisitors, but the usual image is more the kind where someone blows up a system because a single guy got a bit too angry or smelly. But Sigmar's most holy witch hunters? Oh buddy, there's nothing but being personal with these madmen. Burning the witches, confessions, torturing, even though they're not always the one doing each step, you can be sure that a witch hunter knows every single gruesome detail of what's going on. Rather unlike their spaceborne cousins, who can sometimes be a bit removed from the action. In the slightly less grim darkness of not Renaissance Europe, witch hunters are every bit as feared as their spaceborne counterparts. To see that wide-brimmed hat enter the inn is to know in your heart with utmost certainty that by the time they leave, someone is going to die. Whether or not that's true is up to the one in question, but with Geheimnisnacht approaching, there's only one thing you can do. Sit back, do your best to relax, and pray that Sigmar's finest insane asylum escapee doesn't have their suspicions aimed at you. Before we start our regularly scheduled Warhammer Fantasy slop, though, I have a confession. Most domestic life skills I'm pretty good at. I may be disorganized, but I have a clean mess. Cleaning, laundry, ironing dishes, I can be a capable human being. But cooking, gotta be honest, I could certainly be better. I can boil water without starting a fire, which is a lot less common a skill than you'd think, but don't expect any miracles from me. I call my videos slop, but my cooking is actually slop, which is why I'm happy to say this video is sponsored by Factor. Factor makes some high-quality, nutritious, and fresh meals shipped directly to your house. Now, I'm not going to sit here and only tell you Factor makes good food. It does taste good, of course, you can see me devouring it right now, but it does plenty more, because Factor isn't just lunch and dinner. You can get yourself a nice quick breakfast, or something I really appreciate, some nice smoothies. They sent me some latte protein shakes, and I gotta be honest, I think I like those more than the food. And I like the food. And they got plenty of snack options too, for a light little something to bite into at night. And you know what I do a lot? Forget to eat. I wake up, do some writing, do some editing, and then suddenly, oh no, it's 8 p.m. and I haven't actually eaten today. But since it's 8 p.m., there's no time to go to a nice restaurant, I don't want fast food, and I don't feel like cooking at 8 o'clock at night. Well, thankfully, I just throw one of these bad boys in the microwave for 2 minutes, and I got myself a quality meal. But does the idea of good, easy-to-prepare meals delivered directly to your house somehow not sound like enough? Well, how about this? Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code PANCREAS50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code PANCREAS50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Factor's got some real good nutritious food, it's quick and easy to get ready, and with my link you get it at a discount. So order yourself some Factor today for the best meal service there is. Now then, let's celebrate Halloween properly, by burning anyone dressed like a witch at the stake. Witch hunters, in case you missed my incredibly subtle comparisons between the two in the intro, are Warhammer Fantasy's version of the Inquisition. Or rather, the Inquisition is 40k's version of a witch hunter, since we know who came first. As you've no doubt guessed, the very core of the organizations are the same. Find and root out any sources of corruption, unsanctioned magic, and of course, heresy, for such things are the doom of mankind. Their origins are somewhat similar as well, although they're not one for one. After Sigmar's rise to becoming the Emperor and the defeat of Nagash, he had the foresight to realize that an organization dedicated to defending against magic would be a great thing to have to hand. Nagash, while defeated, did a number on the Empire, and his crown nearly corrupted Sigmar himself, and so the barbarian king decided it was time to do something about that kind of thing. Thus he told his close friend Wolfgard Krieger, he'd known since they were children, to handle the newly forged Empire's defense of such manners. Knowing that one guy was absolutely not up to the task of taking that all on himself, he founded what was then known as the Holy Order of the Silver Hammer. They were the Empire's chief defense against magical mischief, but for over 1500 years their existence was kept hidden from the general public. To be clear, they were an organization sanctioned by Sigmar dedicated to rooting out magical anomalies and dealing with witches and the like, which saying it that way makes me think they're the Fantasy SCP Foundation. They would have doubtlessly received their fair share of support, even if it couldn't go through public channels. and being unknown to the public and unknown to anyone are two different things. Doubtlessly, at least a few people put it together that when the priest calls for the heresy to be dealt with and then a shady man burns your kindly old neighborhood grandma alive, there's probably a group of people out there pulling the strings on that sort of thing. But officially, the Order of the Silver Hammer didn't exist. For thousands of years behind the scenes, they plied their trade, quietly removing threats to the Empire of the supernatural variety. That is, until the mid-second millennium of the Imperial calendar. At this time, a number of things that fall under the broad category of heresy were running rampant. Witches, demonologists, necromancers, and outright chaos cults were all over the place, and the Empire could barely do anything to stem the tide. This wasn't strictly speaking the Order's or any particular witch hunter's fault, for this was during the age of the Three Emperors. At this point in the Empire's history, there were so many different people claiming they were the true Emperor that any coordinated effort would die the moment it left the borders of the elector count that put it into motion, and as a result, all kinds of bad sorts were running rampant. In an effort to stop all these threats, the Grand Theogenist of the time, Sibold II, made things a little bit more official. Binding the order to the church in 1682, this is about the point we get the more official witch hunters. He grabbed not only warrior priests for their holy might and fervor, but also investigators from every corner of the empire, recognizing that some heresies need a more subtle touch to find and root out. Worth noting is that according to the Witch Hunter's Handbook, which you can pretty easily find a PDF of online, very few people outside of the order are aware this wasn't its founding date. And even still, they aren't public just yet. With this newly made status as an arm of the church, witch hunters could act more effectively than ever before. While initially the Empire's enemies were dismissive of them, after a few decades they had gathered a network of spies and information sources to root out any serious threats in their purview. As the true scale of what they faced was finally acknowledged, the Grand Theogenist, which as an aside is such a fun title to say, sanctioned the use of force to deal with any magical threats. With this act, the witch hunters had, in form and function, become what they are in modern Warhammer fantasy, although with two more relatively major reforms still to come. There were some pretty immediate teething pains with this newly found organization, however. Because of the scale of the threats, they needed people fast, so the criteria for becoming a member of the Order at this point was more or less being religiously zealous enough. As a result, they let in all sorts of people who were rather less than ideal for a job that requires force and subtlety in equal measure. Sure, they'd whack the heretic, but in the process, they'd also whack his 50 very much non-heretical neighbors. One witch hunter told some townspeople once that if they weren't a witch, they had nothing to fear of him. This was then followed by an event known as the Burning of Almshof. I guess there must have just been a lot of witches in that town. They also murdered the only official order of priestesses the cult of Sigmar had. When Mordheim started being Mordheim, you know, the worst place ever, the cult of Sigmar naturally sent in the Templars to go deal with that mess of a town. They saw these women empowered with holy might and fighting off heresy at every turn, so the Grand Theogenist naturally declared them to be heresy, and then the two groups fought for a year before a comet with twin tails wiped the entire town off the map. Mostly, anyways. The ruins were still full of people looking to make a profit in it. Now, it's never outright stated it was the twin-tailed comet, but I have to imagine that's a pretty clear sign of Sigmar saying he's rather displeased with the Order at this point. That and Mordheim in general, I suppose. The town was trying to recreate the fall of the Eldar, so wiping it off the map wasn't that much of a shame. This sort of corruption and inefficiency would plague the Order until the ending of the Great War against Chaos. After Magnus the Pious was finished saving the Empire and being the undisputed best holder of the name Magnus in Warhammer, he looked at the Order of the Silver Hammer and probably cried a little bit. In order to make it suck a bit less and rein it and the Empire in, he rechristened it the Holy Order of the Templars of Sigmar and created the position of Lord Protector, the head of the Order who answered only to the Emperor and the Grand Theogenist. This partially secularized the Order, making it so future recruits would be more than just religious nutjobs. He also made the Order public at this time, in an attempt to not only put the fear of Sigmar in any would-be heretics, but also to make them somewhat accountable for their actions. He also enacted what's known as the Year of Purges, where the Empire went all Joseph Stalin on the Order and started getting rid of the many bad eggs it had accumulated. Worth mentioning is that he did this so quickly into his reforms that it included the Lord Protector of the time, a man named Otto Springer who was charged with not only treason but, and I quote, profound lunacy. With that, the second major reform of the Witch Hunters was done, and oh, would you look at that, within a generation or two of Magnus the Pious dying, they went right back to just being state-sanctioned killers who'd burn anyone they felt like. In case anyone's looking for a gotcha moment in favor of the Inquisition, however, let me remind you that in order for them to go back to being incompetent, they had to first be competent, which the Inquisition as a whole has never quite managed. This sad decline continued until we reached more or less modern Warhammer fantasy with everyone's favorite legendary lord no one ever picks because Franz and Gelt are right there. Volkmar the Grim. With the help of some of the only remaining competent witch hunters, he once again brought the hammer down on the Order and took control. While the office of Lord Protector was at one point needed to gain control over the Order, it was clear its usefulness had run out, and so was replaced by the positions of Witch Hunter General of the North, South, and East. All of them answer to both Emperor and Grand Theogenist, and within their territories they control their own sanctioned witch hunters. Imagine it's sort of like the Codex Astartes, but for an organization that absolutely needed it instead of just mostly needing it. Now, if one high-up witch hunter goes nuts, at worst he brings a third of the witch hunters down with him, rather than almost all of them. Now, with their history out of the way, we have the witch hunter of the modern day. So what does the average case of a witch hunter look like? What about their training? Well, thankfully, we've got the Matthias Thulman Omnibus, the Witch Hunter Handbook, and every word out of Victor Saltzpyre's mouth to tell us what that's like. The training of a witch hunter is characteristically brutal, with no effort spared to test their faith and constitution. Chosen candidates are first stabbed and drugged to see if they can power through it, with those failing being struck with a sense of sadness and melancholy so severe they're just let back into the Empire because they'll be too broken to ever reveal any secrets they might have learned. Those who pass then have a high-ranking witch hunter interrogate them for 3 days, and if at the end of this they aren't insane or dead, the spiritual training begins proper. Among other things, they're taught what's known as the first of the 7 mysteries. What exactly they are isn't expounded upon, but only the old position of Lord Protector, and presumably the new generals, know what the 7th one is. After that, more spiritual and physical training like swordsmanship awaits them, with many of these lessons focusing on rapiers like good old Vicky Salta uses. Crossbows are a common weapon, and although they can be unreliable, the writer of the handbook admits that shooting someone with a flintlock is a great way to get out of a fight alive. Witch hunters will also be some of the most educated people in the entire Empire, and arguably the world, even more so than the elves and dwarfs, who, while undoubtedly able to access knowledge on mankind and the various races, often just choose to ignore it. Why bother learning about the petty humans when Ulthuan is all that matters? Which, in fairness, is an arguable point for the average elf. Witch hunters in their sacred task, however, must know geography, the history of other cultures, the weapons of the foes they might face. They even know a limited history of the old ones coming onto Earth and the introduction of chaos to the planet, which is some serious stuff. Heresy can come from anywhere, and so they're armed with knowledge as much as they are with traditional weaponry. They'll even eventually be educated on how to recognize different magical scripts and languages, although not how to actually read them, because that's heresy. For what the hunt is like, it's first off important to know that witch hunters, while having the same role of inquisitors, do not have nearly the level of power they do. Inquisitors answer to no one except the High Lords, Custodians, and Guilliman, and even then you can be damn sure they'll try to find a way around that. Witch hunters, meanwhile, have to act within the boundaries of the law set for them. They can't go around killing and murdering immediately unless there's an incredibly obvious source of heresy around. By all means, if you raise an entire graveyard in front of one or ask which of your tattoos of the Chaos Gods look best, they're gonna shoot you in the face. But otherwise, there's rules they gotta follow. Failing to follow them, funnily enough, will likely get other witch hunters sent after the offender. In fact, in the ultimate proof that GW truly is a British company, you gotta have your license to witch hunt. Getting that revoked means no more witch hunter business for you, and presumably also death. And something you might find highly interesting is that the colleges of magic actually have no small amount of power over witch hunters, at least in regards to witchcraft. Among other things, witch hunters have to find and detain hedge mages, petty witches, warlocks, and other unlicensed practitioners of magic. The colleges of magic, however, are the ones who define just what that entails. So if you want to keep that license, you gotta play nice with the wizards. Since witch hunters are taught that all magic comes from chaos, even sanctioned magic, they're, as you can guess, very unhappy at having to follow these rules, much less work with mages. If you've played a game of Vermintide with Victor and Sienna in it, you've heard him complain about her plenty, I'm sure. Although funnily enough, in older lore that was rapidly moved away from, the Chaos God of Law Solkan was the one empowering them to fight against chaos. Be'lakor and the End Times explain they don't actually exist, and the lore rather unfortunately moved away from them as a concept, but at one point witch hunters were the worshippers of a chaos god, intentionally or not. These restrictions might make you think the organization is totally hamstrung, but you gotta remember that sometimes heresy doesn't really exist. In 1645 IC, there was once a case where a witch was made fun of for having big ears, so he cursed the town he lived in to have their ears rot off. He was executed, but the story was found to be so funny that nobles would mutilate their ears as a fashion statement. The emperor then imposed an ear tax, which started the Ishak's Ears riots. I understand that GW is a British company, but by God do the people of the Empire riot like they're French. Seriously though, was that heresy? I mean, the witch was. With him, I'm like Brad Pitt and Fury. Shoot that guy. but all the nobles? That's not really heresy. Sure, it's incredibly stupid, and I would love to see how exactly putting a tax on mutilating your ear leads to riots other than Imperials just loving to riot, but it's good that these rules were in place, because otherwise, everyone involved in the entire affair probably would have been killed. And sometimes there is heresy, but the exact specifics of it mean that not everyone involved has to die. Case in point, Matthias Thulman, and boy oh boy am I gonna have to get creative to talk about this one. Just gonna give up on the comments section, I already know that's a lost cause. One of the cases Matthias Thulman was dealing with prior to his books was a family that, long story short, was accused of heresy. He gathered confessions from all involved, and while he is the closest thing to a morally good witch hunter, that very much still involved torture. He found out that the husband was not a heretic, and neither was the wife. However, the wife had taken some medicine from a very much heretical herbalist in order to not have the baby she was having for a variety of reasons, and the medicine contained warpstone. Warpstone is chaos if it was a rock, and she ate some of it, so she was burned at the stake for corruption, even though it wasn't intentional on her part. The herbalist was also executed, but the husband was let go. Admittedly, this is partially because of his morality, but if Thulman wasn't playing by the rules, he likely would have left with a body count of bare minimum 3 instead of 2, and more likely half the goddamn town minimum if he wasn't a relatively decent witch hunter. Morally decent, that is. He's very effective at his job. Oftentimes, witch hunters will cozy up to any suspected individuals, even going so far as to remove their iconic outfits to better scope out the situation. Only nobles or other important figures in a town will be made aware of the witch hunter so that they can access local resources. Everyone else will be none the wiser until the pyre is lit. Of course, on the flip side, plenty of others absolutely make use of the terror witch hunters strike in the hearts of the Empire's subjects. Everyone from noble to peasant knows that a witch hunter has legal grounds to work towards their death, so sometimes confessions will come flying the moment the hat crests the horizon. A witch hunter walks in, and some terrified innkeeper starts blabbing about how his neighbor's house has screams coming from it in the night, and just like that, Tzeentch cult is purged. However they obtain it, when they do have legal grounds to capture a subject, that's when the interrogation begins. Yes, interrogation means torture. I'm sure you expected that. They employ all sorts of methods to get a confession, some of which you can see here in all their low-resolution glory. I'm a big fan of the whirligig. Put a guy in it and spin him around until he pukes. Sigmar's finest, ladies and gentlemen. It's like the Sandlot if the chewing tobacco scene where they all vomit was a weaponized arm of the church. Anyways, once the confession has been given, which depending on the witch hunter in question is either a job well done or a completely innocent person confessing just to stop the pain, the execution commences. The witch hunter's favored method is burning you at the stake, because it's said to purify both the body and the soul. While undeniably agonizing, in their minds it's a twisted sense of mercy. With the purifying flame, the condemned may be allowed one final chance to earn Sigmar's grace, or enter Mor's garden for a proper afterlife. Of course, in the case of false confessions, this doesn't unburn the innocent, but it's the thought that counts, right? Worth noting is that while they're limited in their powers to go about their job, limited doesn't mean being crippled. Going through procedures must be done, but especially in more remote villages, the witch hunter can act a bit more loosely with their code. This is chiefly how some witch hunters are able to go all slasher movie villain on imperial towns. With news traveling slowly throughout the Empire, this sort of thing can go unnoticed for months, if not years. Even without that, witch hunters still have legal permission to capture people they suspect as heresy, and at that point the person is as good as dead. The legal grounding for doing this is about as shaky as you'd imagine, so plenty of innocent people can be killed with no legal repercussions on the witch hunter's part. As you can probably guess, this constant butchery of their fellow man, whether the condemned are truly heretics or not, drives many witch hunters insane, until eventually they snap. This can range from all sorts of things, like drowning themselves in booze in retirement, becoming all broody and hiding in their ancestral homes, or playing the loot version of Pumped Up Kicks while they shoot up the Great Temple of the Order in Altdorf with flintlocks. Sometimes other witch hunters are sent to stop them, but sometimes they're just left alone. It's a sad fate no doubt made worse by what I said in the intro. There is no disconnect from what these witch hunters are doing. The scale of what they do pales in comparison to the Inquisition, but there is no removing themselves from what they do. Every witch, necromancer, and innocent is executed if not by them, then with their direct supervision. This is not the sort of thing that results in a healthy human psyche, and it's only the most steel-willed of witch hunters that survive to old age partially for this reason. I'd be drowning myself in liquor after a year as a witch hunter in the best case scenario with the kind of shit I'd be seeing. The handbook also does something I'm not yet sure I've seen in other media. It explains why witch hunters will execute those who on the surface don't seem all that harmful. For example, fortune tellers. Odds are pretty good these guys are just full of shit like actual fortune tellers. You know, pay me $100 and I'll give you a vague, nondescript reading that pretty much describes anything that could happen to you. In the best case scenario, these people are scamming good citizens out of their money and putting their faith in heretical nonsense. Worst case scenario, they're accidentally communing with Tzeentch. Similarly, consider herbalists that use particularly unorthodox methods. Even ignoring chaos, there's a non-zero chance your grandma's super special hangover and flu cure is actually containing poison. That sort of thing is more or less exactly what's in the Witch Hunter Handbook as an example. And since this is Warhammer, chaos or necromancy is always a possibility, even if the individual in question isn't actively seeking out these things. Whether or not you believe those are worth burning someone alive for is up to you, but the handbook does at least go out of its way to explain that witch hunters are very much seeking people who have actual potential to cause harm in one way or another. It's for the most part only those that are truly insane that just start firing into the crowd screaming about heresy. For the ranks, there's honestly not much to tell. There's an apprentice who follows around a proper witch hunter, a witch hunter Templar, which is a proper witch hunter, a witch hunter captain who oversees a whole chapter house of them, and the witch hunter generals who oversee entire portions of the empire. I don't believe the higher you go in the ranks, the pointier the hat gets, but it's a very real possibility that shouldn't be discounted. There's also numerous other supporting roles that witch hunters have, especially within a chapter house. People that, while not witch hunters themselves, play important auxiliary roles to assist the Templars in their crusade. For one last thing before we move on to some other witch hunter business, the Skaven question. Are witch hunters just stupid by ignoring them? No, not at all. As you may know, the Skaven are regarded as a myth by most humans in the Empire. At most they acknowledge them as some rat-like beastmen that are nonetheless no more noteworthy than any other beastmen. These views are very much supported by witch hunters. If you start asking too many questions, the nice gentleman in the pilgrim hat is going to ask you to stop next time you go to the tavern. If you keep asking questions, you're going to get black-bagged and disappear forever. This is because witch hunters are educated on everything, including the Skaven. They're very much aware that the rats are not only focused on fighting each other more often than not, but if they perceive the Empire as a threat, they'll mobilize en masse. So they keep things quiet. Of course you don't need to fear the ratmen under our city's citizen, they don't exist. And honestly, out of every time someone in Warhammer has tried to keep a secret, this is the least egregious to me. This isn't the Emperor of Mankind hiding undeniable, fundamental truths of reality from people that should very much be in the know. The Skaven do focus the majority of their efforts one-upping each other. Ignoring them in a lot of cases is honestly all you need to do. Whatever they're getting up to will implode in on itself sooner or later, more often than not. For all that I love Gotchick and Felix, they're two people. The two of them were still able to halt several large-scale Skaven operations in Nuln before the invasion proper began, severely weakening it. Granted, this was with Thanquol's direct help in sabotaging his rivals, but that kind of proves my point. Most witch hunters know that any enterprising rat folk will likely be killed if not by each other, then the rat catchers that prowl the sewers for both normal rats and ones that are a bit too large and clever. Saltzpyre only goes on his crusade because in his backstory, a Skaven took out his eye and was partially responsible for some necromantic cult shenanigans. He's shunned by the rest of the Order, and while at the time of Vermintide in the End Times this seems silly, for most of Imperial history, this was probably the right policy to go with. With all that being said, there are two very important things you should keep in mind. For everything you might read in the Witch Hunter's Handbook, you should know that the foreword of the book is a different witch hunter than the author, informing you that the writer has gone insane in spite of his very illustrious career. So take all the information that comes out of it with a big old grain of salt, because the guy is nuts. And two, this has all been just about the official Templar witch hunters, those who work with the cult of Sigmar directly. There's a few other types you should know about if you plan any heretical shenanigans within Karl Franz's borders. The first are renegade witch hunters. These can be anything from a witch hunter who's left the Order to someone who's just decided they're a witch hunter now. Alone and without the support network those of the Order have, these madmen are on a crusade to cleanse the land of all sorts of nasties, self-preservation and logic be damned. They're oftentimes nothing more than religious madmen, or even people just using the term to invoke fear in others so they give them money, but witch hunters are so terrifying to the people of the Empire that most in rural areas will just go along with it. Of course, if an actual witch hunter catches wind of the latter sort, they're absolutely getting executed, but the Empire's a big place. News only travels as fast as a man can walk, or in the best case, ride a horse, so these charlatans can go some time without punishment. For the former sort of renegade, though, official witch hunters will often tolerate them. Occasionally, this sort can produce good work, and if nothing else, another body to throw into the fray is always welcome. There's also mercenary witch hunters, which in all honesty are just specialized bounty hunters, only called witch hunters because they're hunting witches, rather than as a sign of their training or anything. A noble will hire a dude whose specialty is tracking and removing any particularly dangerous or odd threats from their land, and then they go on to the next case. As with some of the renegades, sometimes these ones get a bit greedy. Sometimes a noble who's about to be burned is miraculously discovered to be a true devotee of Sigmar, and the massive amounts of gold he gave the mercenary hunter just beforehand surely had nothing to do with it. Being granted land, being allowed to take land from others, and good old-fashioned monetary gain are all things that mercenary witch hunters might be persuaded to take instead of doing their righteous duty. As before though, true witch hunters will descend upon anyone caught doing this, so it's relatively rare. It does still happen, but on the bright side for the Order, catching someone doing this makes for a phenomenal public display on why you shouldn't mess with the witch hunters. They may need a license to kill you, but that license is very broad in scope. A subgroup of this type is the chartered witch hunter. They get a charter within the borders of a single noble's domain, and within it are given full legal rights to act as an official witch hunter. They tend to be a bit more secular in their approaches, since the noble hiring them likely doesn't want a fanatic going around burning everyone with slightly too long or too short fingers, but they are nonetheless a potent force. They've the direct backing of the local powers that be, so this type can get plenty of work done. The other churches within the Empire also have things similar to witch hunters, but Sigmar's the state religion. These other groups won't have much power outside of their own church's borders at best, are often poorly funded, and have to play nice with any Sigmarite hunters that come through. There are of course thousands of witch hunters in Sigmar's most holy of domains, but let's just look at a few that stand out among the crowd. The first is Matthias Thulman, who I've talked about occasionally already. Some minor spoilers here, but nothing going too deep into his stories. He's a witch hunter extraordinaire, and when he's in town, actual heretics are getting burnt. With a longsword blessed by Volkmar himself that lets him cut through heresy with ease, he nonetheless uses his wits the most. He's only here for business, and when he's done, he'll move on. It's just that his business is undeniably grim in nature. Like I said though, he's as good a person as a witch hunter can possibly be. That husband from the story I mentioned earlier actually hunted him down as revenge for killing his wife, who, tainted by warpstone or not, he still very much loved. Matthias defeated him, but again allowed him to live, knowing that though the husband was blinded by grief, he was no heretic. By witch hunter standards, that makes him a damn saint. He of course doesn't let heretics get away, but he even goes so far as to hold other witch hunters accountable for how they treat their local townsfolk. In one story, he was initially taken aback by how freely some citizens and even local nobles were calling the local witch hunter captain a total prick. He did of course make sure to publicly do some damage control and imply they should speak carefully when discussing the Order's servants, but when he confronted the witch hunter in question, he laid into the guy no holds barred. He outright said it was a miracle the townsfolk hadn't barged in to kill him already, and that quite frankly it wouldn't be a shame if they did. He's accompanied by his torturer Strang, who is perhaps the most sinful man to ever walk the planet. Within moment of the pair entering a new town, Strang will have made good friends with every smuggler, thief, and prostitute within the place. Despite that, he's a good fighter, and it's even because of these habits that Matthias keeps him around. A witch hunter can never have too many contacts no matter how distasteful, so Strang is allowed to drink and sleep his time away as long as he gets results. Matthias of course always lets Strang know that his soul is destined for damnation because of this, but it's a testament to how patient and tolerant Matthias is that Strang just laughs in response and jokes back at him. Matthias can even be a little bit self-indulgent, and has a bit of a humorous streak. He has a habit of taking the most expensive rooms and inns all for himself, free of charge of course, because surely Sigmar's most devout of servants deserves some worldly comfort. And during one short story, Matthias, Strang, and some other hanger-ons had just gotten through a pretty tough battle. Some people didn't make it, and the carriage they rode in on was destroyed and the horses killed. When they asked Matthias how exactly they were supposed to get home, he had this to say to them.
Do what people without horses have done since the days of most holy Sigmar, the witch hunter advised as he turned back around and continued on his way. Walk.
Thank you, Tom of Astartes Anonymous, for that reading, and thank you, Matthias Thulman, for being such a delightful smartass. If you want to read about what happens when a witch hunter has something resembling a conscience, go check his omnibus out. It's a good read. The next is, of course, none other than the man, the myth, the legend himself, Victor Saltzpyre.
Back! Await your turn of judgment, heretical ones!
The witch hunteriest witch hunter who ever witch huntered. Is there heresy afoot? Well, don't worry, Victor Saltzpyre is going to rip, tear, and shoot it to pieces. Prior to the Vermintide games, as a child he was the son of a blacksmith when a witch hunter captain saw he had potential and took him in. Evidently, this captain was right, because Saltzpyre began his long and successful career as a devout witch hunter of Sigmar's will. One day he was pursuing a vampire's thrall, which happened to be the daughter of a wealthy imperial noble. Alright, well, technically a wealthy burgomeister, but I don't know what that means and I don't feel like looking it up, so we're going with noble. As he was descending into a mine to track her down, however, he noticed an excess of a strange, glowing green rock that radiated malevolent energy. Warpstone, of course. Eventually he found that the noble had made deals with not only the vampire, but the Skaven themselves, and the rest of the incident is a bit fuzzy. We know he had the noble executed, but the fate of the daughter and everything else is unclear, although certainly unpleasant. After this, his obsession with the Skaven began. He would attempt to hunt them down at any occasion, trying to put an end to the foul race once and for all. By the time of Vermintide 1, he was escorting Sienna through Ubersreich to see her tried and probably executed, but this never came to pass, as you no doubt know. Despite his slight questioning of his faith during Vermintide 2 at one point, he emerged unshaken as before and continued his crusade. Woe betide the Skaven, Rotbloods, and whatever else may threaten Holy Sigmar's ravaged body. His land, ravaged by warfare and strife. That's what I meant. His fate come the end times conclusion and Age of Sigmar is unknown, but if you'd like my guess, Sigmar brought him back as is alongside the rest of the Ubersreich 5, or 4, doesn't matter. No Stormcast enhancements added, because really, do you think they need it? You slaughter so many rats and Norskins in those games, you could build a city out of their corpses. Maybe that's Sigmar's true ultimate plan against chaos, Nagash, and destruction. Finish rebuilding Saltzpyre and the rest, and setting them loose on whatever is pissing him off the most at any given moment. He's a real cool guy, that opinion in no way influenced by the fact that I main him. And for our final witch hunter, Diedrich Kastner. Oh, you haven't heard of this guy? If you're watching a Warhammer Fantasy video, I can almost guarantee you have, but allow me to refer to him by his more commonly known name. Archaon the Everchosen. While not a part of the Templars of Sigmar, which is the official witch hunter order, he was a knight of the Order of the Twin-Tailed Orb, a religious order of knights directly tied to the cult of Sigmar. He was one of, if not the most valiant knight of the order, and given its religious bent, it's not at all a leap in logic to consider him a former witch hunter. Former being the operative word. Now he's pretty lost in the chaos sauce. Just goes to show that no one is truly incorruptible. But wait, we're not quite done yet. After all, this is Warhammer Fantasy, where the other factions are actually given proper lore and development. So while brief, allow me to tell you of the closest things the elves and dwarfs have to witch hunters, as well as a brief stopover in Kislev. For the brave Dawi, the closest they have is the Order of Guardians. Dedicated to the ancestor god Gazul, who is the protector of the dead, these dwarfs primarily focus on defending the tombs of dead dwarfs from anything that would desecrate them. They were founded in 1681 IC, making them by dwarf standards a fairly recent organization. This was done as a direct result of the Night of the Restless Dead, where none other than Nagash himself resurrected once more upon the world. In order to keep things calm in the dwarf crypts, the faithful of Gazul took it upon themselves to protect their honored ancestors. Originally from the undead, but I'm sure in practice they more often than not fight off Skaven trying to steal random shit from the dwarfs' basements. Those rat bastards are like that. Amongst the Dark Elves, we have the members of the Cult of Cain. This is a bit all over the place since in old lore plenty of Druchii were outright worshippers of chaos, but as time went on that was done away with, and the Cult of Cain polices the Dark Elves to make sure whatever they pretend is their morality is kept pure. Are you thinking too nice of thoughts or wishing we had old lore back and wanting to worship Slaanesh? Well, in that case, the nice naked elf ladies will pay you a visit and offer your heart to the god of murder. For the High Elves, we've the Swordmasters of Hoeth. On the tabletop in Total Warhammer, there's some killer elite infantry that can rip through the enemy like butter. They practice their sword skills to such an extent that they take the weight of their eyelashes into account when they swing, and every time they fight, it's like when Trunks cut down Frieza's men and sheathed his sword right as they all fell over. Yes, that's not exclusive to Dragon Ball, but I don't care. Sparking Zero has just come out at time of writing, and I wanted to mention the drink. In lore, they act as both this and as an internal police of the High Elves. The cults of pleasure may not be as prevalent amongst the Asur as before, but you can always find some people being just a bit too decadent for common society if you look hard enough. If this happens, then the Swordmasters will pay that elf a visit and have some words with them. Words, of course, meaning the same thing as when a human witch hunter interrogates someone, only they don't have to even go as far as waiting for a confession and public execution. In battle, they're a whirlwind of death that can hold off entire armies at once, and if you get a visit from one in the dead of night, it's best to say your prayers to whatever Assyrian forsaken god you worship, because you'll be dead by daylight. And finally, Kislev, who have the Chekists. Much like the rest of Kislev's lore, no one was really trying when they came up with that little gem. Chekists go around eliminating chaos cults and the like, as with their imperial counterparts, a job even more important here due to Kislev's proximity to the chaos wastes. Of course, a lot of these supposed chaos cultists are just the garden variety quote-unquote enemies of the state. Are you thinking too many bad thoughts about the Tsarina? Then come with me, comrade. We would simply like to have a word with you. If this sounds rather excessively dystopian, consider that the entire damn organization is named after the first instance of the Soviet secret police. Not exactly subtle. And with that, we have the Witch Hunters of Warhammer Fantasy. Perhaps they won't get you today or tomorrow, but if there's heresy afoot, they won't rest until it's been snuffed out. As Victor Saltzpyre so lovingly puts it,
The climb is your foul existence! Your sentence is death!
Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the license to my witch hunter, giving me the clearance I need to commit legally sanctioned hate crimes. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. You know, I think if you plopped Saltzpyre into 40k, he'd immediately create a manifestation of Sigmar within the warp. The dude's faith is so strong, he became able to channel holy magic after a hike. Big E can only wish he had someone a tenth as devoted as Victor Saltzpyre in his ranks. I'm sorry, Sisters of Battle, but there's no outdoing Saltzpyre's faith. Yes, I had to get in one more dig at 40k, it's who I am. I like the less popular thing, so I need to be bitter towards the more popular thing.